Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So Zabu is on the horizon, going to be dropping later tonight. Really looking forward to jamming some games with the new card. But we created some theorycraft lists, and these are pretty much the lists I'm going to be trying as soon as he releases. So I wanted to get a little video together to showcase some decks across all the different pools that really utilize Zabu the best I think he can be. So we'll start off here. Unfortunately, I don't think Zabu is a great card for Pool 1. So if you haven't seen Zabu yet, Zabu is a 3-cost, 2-power, and has an ongoing ability. Your 4-cost cards cost 2 less, minimum 1. This is a very, very powerful effect and is definitely going to encourage deck building around 4-cost cards. There are a lot of powerful 4-cost cards in the game, so I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see how Zabu impacts the game. And much like Silver Surfer, I expect a lot of people to be playing this card in the first week or so. So let's take a look at the decks we have here. Starting off, we have a Pool 2 deck. Like I mentioned, I think Pool 1 is kind of underwhelming for Zabu. Luckily, even if you're a brand new player, you won't be in Pool 1 for too long. So starting off with Pool 2, that's when we get access to some of the better tech cards, which just so happen to be 4-drops here. Looking at the deck, pretty standard low-end curve stuff. So we have Scorpion, Armor, Lizard, all really good 2-drops. Storm is our only other 3-drop to help close down a lane. This can also be pretty good after getting the Zabu off, as we can go Zabu into Storm, into dropping 2 or potentially even 3 4-drops, depending on what turn it is. And the cheap stuff on the lower end of the curve also helps Storm get better value. It's kind of a backup plan in case we don't draw the Zabu. Then we have a lot of payoff for the Zabu. We are running both powerful 4-mana tech cards in Shang-Chi and Enchantress. They're some of the best 4-drops you can have access to in Pool 2. And then we just have a lot of the other strong contenders. We have Jessica Jones, who's good power for the cost. Moon Girl is especially nice because she can help get us more copies of our good 4s, whether that be our tech cards or just some of the other value stat sticks. Really useful card with Zabu. Warpath, one of the best power for cost as long as you are mindful of the condition. White Queen is nice because I imagine there are going to be a bunch of other Zabu gamers running around, so this could give us another 4-drop and gives us decent stats. And then we have Chavez to make our deck more consistent. Zabu is very much a deck where we are building it around Zabu, so we want our chances of getting Zabu on curve to be as high as possible, and America Chavez definitely helps us out with that. I think this is a really solid version of a Zabu deck if all you have access to are Pool 2 cards. Moving on to Pool number 3 here, we have 2 decks for Pool 3, starting out with a Sarah deck. So one of the things people often mention in chat, and one of the first things that came to my mind was Sarah, as Sarah makes it so not only do your 4-drops cost 2, but they actually can cost as low as 1 if you happen to get Zabu into Sarah. So with the Dream curve, we can kind of go Zabu into play 2 4-drops, into Sarah, into play as many 4-drops as we can. So looking at the list, you'll probably notice a trend here that I generally gravitate towards the same early game cards because I think they are some of the most efficiently costed cards in the game. We have Scorpion, Armor, and Lizard as our low end, Zabu as our main 3-drop. Then 4s, we keep a lot of the 4s from the Pool 2 version of the deck. However, we do make some changes. I did opt to pull Shang-Chi out of this list. The main reason for that is I'm not entirely sure if there are going to be a ton of Shang-Chi targets or not, because it depends what other people are playing. There aren't a ton of targets in Zabu, so I'm guessing with mirror matches, it might not be super useful always, but again, it depends how people are building their deck. But we do have some interesting additions from Pool 3 here, namely Rescue and Typhoid Mary, 2 of the better stats for cost in terms of 4-drops. And we can even get rid of that Typhoid Mary negative benefit or negative downside with Enchantress if we want to. And Enchantress is going to be a must in the Zabu decks to counter opposing Zabu decks. Then obviously we have Sarah. We can kind of hand dump a bit, which makes the Moon Girl have a bit more value. And then, much like in the first deck, we have Chavez for consistency. You're going to notice that as a pretty big trend with this, as I think the power of this deck goes up a ton when you have Zabu on curve, so we want to optimize letting that happen as much as possible. Another interesting deck here we have for Pool 3, and that only requires one Pool 3 card, aside from the new card, is Kazoo. So we have kind of a zooey take here. This one comes from Marvel Snap Zone. This is the only one we didn't brew ourselves. And it's a neat idea. So we have quite a few powerful 4s here, but the neat thing about this deck is we aren't really all in on the Zabu plan. We're kind of just a good zoo deck that uses Zabu to cheat out some very powerful 4-drops. Those 4-drops being Khazar, who is obviously thematic with Zabu, Strong Guy, and Hell Cow. Hell Cow being the only Series 3 card in the deck. The idea with this deck is it's kind of just like a regular Strong Guy zoo deck. However, we are able to run a bit higher costed cards because we have ways of discarding them with the Hell Cow and the Swordmaster. Because we do want our cards discarded to get that Strong Guy nice and buff. And this is pretty neat because this potentially allows us to play Strong Guy and Hell Cow together on the final turn, while still having mana for Khazar or some other 1-drops. So I think it's a pretty neat version of the build, and it goes in a bit of a different direction than a lot of the other Zabu lists that are really all in on his effect. So I think this is definitely a neat option if you don't have access to a lot of Pool 3 cards. Moving into Pool 4 territory, one thing that immediately stood out in my mind as a powerful thing to be doing with Zabu are Spider-Man, Absorbing Man kind of things. So Spider-Man has long been a card that has a very powerful effect, especially if you play it on the second to last turn, lock your opponent out of a lane, but 4 cost is pretty high. And so as a result of that, I find Spider-Man hasn't found a home in a lot of more popular decks recently, and I did try out with Spider-Man the Absorbing Man combo, so you can just Spider-Man into Absorbing Man, and then you just lock a lane on 4 and relock it again on 5, and you've got yourself a lane. The problem is you're using most of your resources to do that, and Zabu kind of helps us avoid that, because not only can we get extra copies of our Spider-Man or Absorbing Man with Moon Girl, having them be 2 energy, so we can actually double lock a lane with Spider-Man, Absorbing Man on the same turn, is a really, really cool bonus. This deck does go the Storm direction since we're kind of a lane control deck. And then I did end up popping Drax in here. I'm not 100% if Drax is going to be optimal. There are a lot of 4-drops you could put in this deck as possible replacement. Even Shang-Chi, depending on how many Shang-Chi targets there are around. But for a deck that kind of forces the opponent to play into a limited number of lanes, Drax actually felt like it made more sense. Other than that, just a lot of the good stuff 4-drops here, like we have in the other decks. Enchantress, Jessica Jones, Moon Girl, White Queen, and Chavez for that consistency. And that brings us to our last Zabu Theorycraft, the Pool 5 Whale version. So unfortunately, due to 2 of the cards in this list being in Pool 5, as well as Absorbing Man being in Pool 4 currently, this is going to be a list that a lot of players are not able to try right away. However, I do think this potentially could be the strongest Zabu list available, as it's using some pretty broken combination of cards here. So this goes in a bit of a different direction. You might notice we have Psylocke here instead of things like Armor or Scorpion. The idea with Psylocke is it gives us a bit of a backup plan. If we do not draw our Zabu on time, we can Psylocke on turn 2, which guarantees us a 4-drop on 3, because our deck is so full of them. So a little bit of a contingency plan there for when we don't draw the Zabu, so we can go 4 on 3 into 4 on 4, 4 on 5, 4 on 6, or Chavez on 6. Hopefully we draw a Zabu sometime within that time, but if we don't, Psylocke has a pretty decent purpose. Then Lizard, just because really good tempo 2-drop. Obviously Zabu here, namesake of the deck, but where it gets really interesting are some of the Pool 5 cards we have here, namely Darkhawk and Shuri. So these are 2 very, very powerful effects, and it turns out that Darkhawk gets better because we can run Rock Slide in this list. And not only can we run Rock Slide, we can run Wong too. And there are some very silly things you can do when you make these 4-cost cards cost 2. So just off the top of my head, a few examples include you could go Wong into Shuri on the same turn. So you curve out Zabu, you play Wong into Shuri. Your next thing is going to have its power doubled twice. Then the following turn, you can play Rock Slide. Rock Slide will double from 6 to 12 and 12 to 24. You have a 24 power Rock Slide. The opponent gets 2 things dumped in their deck. Then you could also at the same time shut down a lane with Spider-Man. You could play Darkhawk, who's going to be bigger because of the rocks in your opponent's deck. If the Wong is still out, it'll be even bigger because not just 2 rocks, but 4 rocks. Moon Girl gives us a way to get extra copies of our Shuri, of our Darkhawk. We have the Spider-Man Absorbing Man stuff so we can lock down a lane. Enchantress for Mirror Match and other ongoing effects. Moon Girl to double up on some of our very powerful effects. And Chavez for the deck consistency. In my opinion, this is the strongest version of Zabu. I think all the decks we mentioned here have a good chance of being pretty competitive, but I do think due to the power level of a few cards here, namely Shuri being probably the biggest power spike with just being able to play it for 2, especially on the same turn as Wong potentially, I think is going to enable some really ridiculous stuff, because even if we, let's say, do double Shuri into something like a Spider-Man, that's still a 12 power Spider-Man. So that could be enough to totally flip a lane on its own on turn 5, and then the opponent can't play anything there on turn 6. You could even get, you know, a double Spider-Man, locking 2 lanes with the Absorbing Man. We have a bunch of good stuff to copy with the Absorbing Man, so not only Spider-Man, but Enchantress, Rock Slide, Moon Girl, Shuri. Just seems like a really, really powerful list. If you happen to have the cards for it, I'd highly recommend it. In terms of if you're trying to focus one specific Series 5 card, I think Shuri is probably the way to go because she sees play in the most variety of decks. And in my opinion, she is the, if not strongest, tied for strongest of the currently released Pool 5 cards. And you can do a lot with her outside of the Zabu shell as well as in it. But Darkhawk also has not been disappointing. So both really cool, powerful cards, and I'm excited to see how they work in Zabu. So those are all our Theorycraft decks for Zabu. I'll have links in the description if you want to check out these decks for yourself and copy them into the game for importing and whatnot. Other than that, I will be streaming the new season when it goes live. It goes live at daily reset time, January 2nd. So the day this is going up, handful of hours after it comes out, we'll be streaming a bunch of Zabu stuff, and we'll be getting some games up with it here on YouTube. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear what you're excited to try with Zabu in the comments below. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.